Next we are going to learn about pseudo classes. So pseudo classes are something that it matches elements based on the additional information provided along with the selectors. It allows to dynamic styling for the different states of elements. For example, when we hover the mouse over links, or when the link is in active mode, or when the focus is set to one HTML element. So these are dynamic states of elements, and when those states become active, the properties which we apply inside the pseudo classes will be applied. So pseudo classes starts with the colon. So what we need to do is, along with the selector, we need to pair the pseudo classes, and we use colon in between the selector and pseudo class. And then, like we always do, we specify the CSS property rules inside of curly braces. So we'll talk about the anchor pseudo classes. These are used for the hyperlinks. So this is the unvisited link, and this is how we can use colon link. Then we have colon visited, that is for the visited link. Then we have colon hover. So when you hover mouse over the link, you can use hover as the pseudo class. And then we have finally colon active, that is basically used for the active link. So these are different states of a hyperlink, and this is how we can use pseudo class and apply different styles to the different state of hyperlink. Then we have first child adds the pseudo class. So it makes sense to use this when you have group of same HTML elements and then you want to apply certain style to the first element only. So in case of ordered list, you can have multiple list items, and in case you want to apply a different color or different styling to the first element, then you can make use of this pseudo class. So what I have done over here is along with the colon, I have specified first child here as the pseudo class. And when you have multiple lists, so this is how it will be displayed. So to the first item, it has given the different color. Similarly, we have last child. It is same as the first child. The difference is that the styling will be done, or the CSS property rules will be applied to the last element. So this is how your output will be. Color has been changed for the last element. Then we have nth child as the pseudo class. So this basically targets one or more element of the parent element. So nth child is the pseudo class name, and inside of this parenthesis you specify n, and this n can be any number, or you can specify a keyword like odd or even, or you can write certain expression. So again, n is the number over here. Okay, so you can write, let's say, keyword odd or even, or you can write something like this, 2n plus 1. So again, n is a number. Okay, so if I write 2n plus 1, so for the first element it will replace its value, that is 1. So 2 plus 1, because 1 multiplied by 2 is 2, then it will give me 3. So the indexing will start with 0, and that is how the first element will be selected. So expressions is the complex form and something that cannot be explained over here in a very short span. So expression is a very detailed topic, though it's very simple to understand. In the description, I will give a reference point wherein most of the pseudo classes are explained on a web page. So from there you can reference this. But pseudo classes are something that is not very often used unless you are working on very complex UI designing. In certain cases you might be requiring this. But even in my experience, I have never used anything complex than nth child, or use of even or odd elements. So this is the example where I have 2n. So 2n is basically, it will give you even numbers. So in this case, what is happening is, for the second row, it is highlighting the background as red. Okay. Alternatively, you could have written even as the keyword and it would have given you the same results. So we'll play around a few examples in the coding session. So for now, let us continue. So lang is another pseudo class which is quite useful when you're working on multiple languages on the same page. So what it does is, for the certain language code, you can specify the different style that will be applied. Okay, so this is one sample. So here you can write your language code, and and set different background or different CSS to the particular language code, and this will be only picked up when you specify the same language code along with the lang attribute inside of this particular p tag. It will work only then. Then we'll talk about pseudo elements quickly. So this is another way of styling elements that are explicitly defined by position of that particular element in the document tree. And this can style elements without ID or class. So you don't need to specify a certain ID or class name over here, and you can just simply write the pseudo element along with the selector with the use of double colons. So here are few pseudo elements. One is the first line. With the use of this, it will apply CSS property rules to the first line in the HTML like this. Similarly, you have first letter. Using this, it will apply styles to the first letter of the first line. So you can notice this P is displayed in the different colors. So this is quite useful when you have an old newspaper kind of a UI that you want to render, and in that first letter will be something like this, and the subsequent text will be in the small character sizes like this. Okay. Then we have before and after. These are quite oftenly used, and these are very useful in case you want to insert certain context or apply certain style before and after the element's content. And content properties usually used along with the before and after pseudo elements. So this is one example. I have added before and after pseudo elements to the h1 tag. Okay, and then inside it I have specified content, and I have specified that this is the URL or this is the element, and I have specified URL for that element which will be rendered along with the h1 tag. So this is the example. This is our h1 tag, and before and after this h1 tag, these elements have got added in addition. So that was all for pseudo elements and classes. Now let us continue with the opacity. And opacity is quite required when we want to specify a transparency of a element. In most of the modern browsers, you can use opacity directly as the property name, like I have specified here, and then you can specify value starting from 0 to 1, and it can be like this. So all the modern browsers can make use of this, but in some case of older versions, we will require certain different keyword. I'll specify that in a bit. So when you specify opacity equal to 0.6, this is how your output would be. You can see that this particular element is slightly opaque now, and this element is slightly transparent now. So as I said earlier, to cover the cross-browser compatibility, the opacity property can be alternatively used in Internet Explorer 8 and lower versions using Microsoft only property, that is the alpha filter, and zoom property is used to scale the content. So this is the example. You can use the filter property, and you can specify the value along with the alpha function like this. Okay, where you can write opacity equal to 50, and then you can specify zoom level equal to 1, and this is one additional fix that is required for Internet Explorer 7. But there are hardly 1 or 2% user could be using i8 or the lower versions like i7. But it is still better that you know about this, because most of the government offices usually work on older versions of PC, where they might not be using the latest version of the browser. And also in some banking application or in some restricted environment, there won't be facility to install the latest browsers, or maybe the updates will be disabled. So there could be requirement that your UI or your CSS should be identical on IE and lower versions. So we need to take care of those cases as well. So one special important or side note that I want to mention here is that when we write code related to CSS, HTML, we need to ensure that the code is cross-browser compatible. What that means is your output should be identical across all the browser types. So again, with this multiple properties, we have the similar output over here. Then to cater all the browsers for setting opacity, what we can do is we can combine these properties, okay? Because we will not know that what browser user is using for accessing your web page. So what you can do is you can specify opacity, okay? So this will take care of all the modern browsers. And in case user is viewing your page from IE8 or lower versions, then this code will be considered by the rendering engine of that browser. So this code will be taking care of rendering opacity on your browser. So you can see that we have achieved the similar output. At the time of writing this example, we have used Chrome as a browser. So that is how we have got this similar effect. You might consider trying to view this page on lower versions of browser to get an idea how this is going to function. We'll quickly talk about RGBA. We have already seen this, but how RGBA can be applied to create transparency with the background. So technically what we are trying to do is set transparency using the colors to the background. So we have seen that RGB values ranges between 0 to 255, but there is one additional parameter which is the alpha, and its value ranges from 0 to 1. So we can set background opacity like this. So I have specified background as the property name over here, and then using RGBA we have specified the background color, and this is the opacity level set by the fourth parameter. So this is how your output will be. So from the example sets, now we will talk about the example on pseudo classes. So we are going to discuss about pseudo elements and opacity. So in the folder you will find these two files. One is the CSS file and other one is the HTML file. There is the logo file that we will be also using. So I have kept these files open here in the Sublime text, and I have also kept the output window opened. So this is the HTML file that I have kept open. So in the HTML file you can see that I have written the CSS file. Then we have a order list, then a table, then a p tag. Notice that I have specified lang keyword over here and specified code with K and code with C as the language code. So ideally this is not something that will be used in actual coding scenarios. So what you can use here is the cultural info like India and language Hindi, something like that. But just to simplify things, I have kept this as a language code over here. Then we have few p tags, so that is something that we will be using for pseudo elements. And then we have two p tags, that is for opacity's example. So there I have specified these classes. So let us see the CSS code. So in the CSS code you can notice that I have used the pseudo classes. So first child, last child, these are elements that we have used. So we have also used nth child. Then for the lang code I have specified code and this code with K, and then there we have changed the background color. Then we have a couple of more examples on pseudo elements. One is for first line and other one is for first letter. We have also used before and after, and then the code for opacity. So let me just go to the browser window and explain you these CSS codes. So I'm going to open the inspect window, and you can see that in the first OL tag we have highlighted the first element in red color and the other one in this particular color. So how this is happening? So let us check the CSS code for it. So you can see that this OL tag doesn't have any CSS, or it has the CSS, but this is the basic and this is not having any impact on the styling of this OL tag. So you can also see that this is not coming from our CSS code. So this is the default styling that is applied by the rendering engine. But if you select the first object, you can see that this particular CSS is getting applied. and source for this file is our CSS file. So you can see that this OLLI first child as the pseudo class is getting selected. Okay, and this particular code will be applied to the first element only. You can also see for the last element in the code, you have this particular color set, so that is getting applied only on the last color. So in the code, if we change the number of elements, you can see there would be difference. Now let's say, suppose I add two more elements over here, and let me just change the text that is displayed. So let me write SQL and let's say MongoDB. Okay, when I hit refresh, you can see that the Python has changes color to default black color and MongoDB has got the color. The reason here is that this is the last element, that is why the color is getting applied to the last element. Similarly, we can make use of the nth element. So here what I'll do is I'll add one more CSS code. Let me copy this and paste over here. So instead of last child, I'm going to say nth-child. Okay, and in bracket I'm going to write 3. So to this 3 I'm going to specify value as, let's say, 444. Let's say the color I am going to write is 9 to 7, and when I hit refresh, you can see that a new color is getting applied to the third element, that is JavaScript. So similarly, for the next example, we have a table over here. You can see that second row of this particular table is having background as red. So the CSS code that we have written is table tr colon nth child, and we have written 2n. So 2n is going to give me all the even numbers, and if I write 2n plus 1, it is going to give me all the odd numbers. Okay, so you can see that this is the first row and this is the second row. So that is why it is getting the color as background because of this particular property, and the third row is the default color, that is white. So let me do one more thing. I am going to add more rows to this particular table. So let me just copy paste few lines and hit refresh. You can see that all the new rows that are being added are having this alternate colors. And if I change the property over here, instead of 2n, let's say I'm writing 2n plus 1. So you can see that the rows have got shifted now. So odd rows are getting highlighted with the background red. Okay, so let me just undo this. So with that, all the even rows will get the background color red. Then for this particular line code, you can see that in the HTML, I have specified line code as code and other one also as code, but the one is with K and other one is with C. And in the CSS, we have specified the lang as the pseudo classes, and whatever the value that we mention over here, if that value matches with the attribute lang, then that particular background color will be applied. Okay, so you can see that to this particular language code we have applied this red color, and to this one we have applied this gray color. Okay, and here we have the attribute and attributes value. Then we will take example of these two p tags, so wherein we have the first line colored in different colors, and in the other example we have first letter displayed in the different color. So you can notice here, because of these two pseudo classes, these are the effects that we are getting. So let me just try increasing font size of the first letter. So if I write, let's say 30 pixels, and when I hit refresh, so you can see that the first letter has got the font size of 30 pixels. And in this previous example, here also we can write something like this. Let's say I write this code and I just change, let's say, font weight to, let's say, 500. Okay, and you can notice that the font weight has got changed, it has got applied. There's no significant difference. Maybe we can try changing it from here. Okay, so if I write 600, you can see the notable difference over there. So let me just paste it over here. Okay, and then when I hit refresh, let me just save this file, and yeah, so once refresh, you can see that this font width for this particular line has got changed. It has got increased. Then we will talk about this before and after as the pseudo classes. So what we are doing is, to the h1 tag, we are adding this content element with the value as the logo.png, which is an image. So if you notice, this is the general h1 tag, and before and after this we have added one image. Okay, so you can see the css code for this h1. We have specified before and after, and inside that we have added content, that is one image. Then finally we will talk about the opacity. Opacity is very fairly simple to use. Only thing that we need to care about is the cross browser consistency that we can get with the results. So for all the modern browsers, we are writing opacity, and then we specify value between 0 to 1 in decimals. So something like this. So 0.6 is the value. For i8 and all the lower versions, we can specify filter property. There we can specify alpha with opacity value, but this should be from 0 to 100. And for Internet Explorer 7, we can specify the zoom level. So these are three options. So whichever works for your browser will be automatically picked up by the rendering engine. So this is one way to do it. So other way, we know that we can specify background, and we can use rgba, wherein you can specify the alpha value, which again starts from 0 and goes till 1. So in the example, if you notice, we have this particular css code applied to it. So if you notice, when I change the opacity, so let's say I'm writing 0.6, then let's say I'm writing 0.1. So you can see that the opacity is changing accordingly, like this. Similarly, in the other example, we can specify, or we can change this particular value. So let's say I'm writing 0.15, or let's say 0.65. So you can notice that the opacity is changing over here. So again, you can play around with this particular example. You can download these files from our website and try working on this code. Alright, so now we will talk about gradients. So in gradients, we have two types. One is linear gradient and other one is the radial gradient. But what gradient does is that we must know. So gradients allows us to create smooth transitions between two or more colors. So to understand this, we may have one, let's say, black color, and other one, let's say, yellow color. So the gradient will start from higher values of black to the higher values of yellow, and in between it will choose random colors, which will be slightly decreasing or increasing the values to glow closer to the other color that we have specified, and that is how the gradients get applied. So for gradients, we must define at least two color stops. So the color that I mentioned, those two colors are called as the color stops, and we can have multiple color stops in a single gradient. With gradient, we can also set the starting point and also the direction of gradient. So syntax for a typical linear gradient is, we specify the direction and then we specify multiple color stops. So color stops are nothing but the normal color codes which we write in RGB or hexadecimal formats. So here is one example. So by default, the gradient will move from top to bottom. So this is going to be in this direction. So in this example, what we are doing is, we have specified height and width to this particular class, and wherever this particular class is applied, that element will get height and width of 100 pixels. And then the gradient is not something that will work in all the browsers. So we can have one fallback strategy wherein, in case the gradients are not supported, so at least a fixed color will be displayed. So we are using this as a fallback, and the standard syntax, which is basically supported by CSS3, or as specified in the core documentation of W3C. So this is the standard syntax. So let us hope that this gets adopted by most of the browsers, and all the rendering engines will start processing this particular property. So this is the standard code when we write the linear gradient and then we specify the color stops. And then for Safari 5.1 to 6.0, we can write this syntax. So instead of linear gradient, we write hyphen WebKit hyphen linear hyphen gradient. And then for Internet Explorer 10, we write hyphen ms hyphen linear hyphen gradient. And then we specify the color stops. So after writing this code, this is something that you'll get to see on your screen. So this is the first color and this is the second color. And this is the direction of your gradient. So by default is top to bottom. So in case you want to change the direction, what you can do is add this particular line. So you are saying to right. So it will start from your left and it will move towards your right. Okay. So this is the standard syntax, but for Safari and Internet Explorer, we are required to write left. So in this case, left becomes the first direction. Okay. And then by default, it will move to the right. Similarly, you can write to top or to bottom or to left. Then we have diagonal gradient as well. So what we can do is we can just specify two directions. So when I say to top and right, okay, so this is the direction that is going to be, because this is top and right. So from the bottom left, from this particular corner, the gradient will start towards top and right corner. And again for Safari and Internet Explorer, you can write bottom left. Okay, so that will be the starting point of your gradient and it will move towards top right corner. So this is how it is going to look. So this is my first color, red, and this is the second color. So this is the direction of the gradient. Then we will talk about the linear gradients, where we can specify angles instead of the directions. Using angles, we can control directions easily. So instead of writing predefined keywords, we can easily write the directions. So to simply understand this, 0 degree means it creates bottom to top gradient. So typical direction of the 0 degree would be bottom to top like this. Okay. So this is the 0 degree and this would be the 90 degree. So because this is bottom to top, we are talking about here is from left to right. Okay. And similarly, when I say 180 degree, so this will be top to bottom. Okay. So this would be 180 degree. So in this example, we have written 90 degree. So that is why it is left to right. Then we have multiple colors. So for that, we need to just add few more color stops. So you can see in this example, I have just added one more color stop. So in the output, you will see that there are three different colors. So this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So your gradient direction will be same. So these are getting rendered like this. And you can have any number of color stops. Now these are equally distributed. Okay. So using percentage, you can specify amount of distance between two color stops. So here what we have done is, this is your first color stop, this is second, and this is the third one. So here we are writing 40% for the first color stop and 50% for the second color stop, like this. So you can specify either in percentage or you can also specify absolute length. So that choice is up to you. Then we will talk about the repeating linear gradient. So in case this is your example, we have specified 20% and 30% as the ratio over here for these three color stops. So this is how it is going to repeat itself. So this is the one gradient that we have specified and it is getting repeated like this. Okay. And you can also notice that when space is not available, it will just render the part that it can render and the remaining part will be omitted. Then we have radial gradients. So in the case of radial gradient, Color emerges from the central point and smoothly spreads in circular or elliptical shape. So there are two types. One is the circular and other one is the elliptical. So wherein you will have this line and it will move like this and complete itself. Okay. So here is the general syntax. You write radial gradient and then you specify your shape, whether it's circle or ellipse, and you also specify size at the position and you also specify your color stops. So as I said, the shape is either circle or ellipse. Size of the gradients, that is the ending shape, and the default one is the farthest side. So we will talk about this one in the upcoming slide. And the position is basically the starting point of the gradient. So this can be in units, pixel, em, or percentage. Or you can also specify standard keywords such as left, right, top, and bottom. So let us take one example. So this is how the radial gradient will look. So here what we have done is you have just added 3 color stops. So you can notice this is your first color and this is the second color and this is the third color. So you can notice that in the circular fashion it has rendered the gradient. Okay, so each circle over here is a different color. Okay, so these circles are basically forming the gradient effect. So in case you have to use the shape, you can specify it like this. So I have written ellipse over here and you can see the gradient has drawn with the 3 color stops. You can alternatively write circle also instead of ellipse. Then we can specify size and position. So it can be set using these keywords: closest side, farthest side, closest corner, and the farthest corner. As we discussed, we can write either the keyword or the units directly in pixels or percentage or em. So this is one example. I have written circle, then I have specified farthest side at the left bottom, and then I have specified 3 color stops. So in the output you can see that the position is the left and bottom. So this is your left and bottom and this is the farthest side, and from here the gradients will start. Then similar to repeating linear gradient, we have repeating radial gradient. So here only thing is that it is going to repeat itself in the circular form. So again we have specified values in percentage over here, and you can see for a single gradient, once it ends, the second gradient starts. Okay, and then the third one and so on. We can also apply transparency with the gradient. So for that what we are going to do is we are just going to specify the direction, and we are going to specify rgba values in the color stop information. So these are 2 color stops, plus we have added one image over here. So for the first color stop I have specified value as 0, and for the second color stop I have specified value of alpha as 1. So that is why it has created this transparency and also added the colors. So here what we have is basically this image, and then we have 2 color stops which are causing this particular effect. Then we will quickly talk about drop shadows and take live coding session where you can understand these gradients and drop shadow very easily. So drop shadow basically allows you to apply shadow to the elements, and this can be done in 2 forms. One is the box shadow, other one is the text shadow. So let us talk about box shadow first. So box shadow basically adds shadow to the element. Okay, so it applies basically to the box of the element. Okay, so even if it is a div or p, so the shadow will be added to the box element of that particular HTML element. And you can add multiple shadows. Okay, so it's not necessary that only one colored shadow will be added. You can add multiple shadows, and the values you can keep comma separated. So this is the syntax. So box shadow is the property name, and this is the value. I'm setting offset x and offset y. So this is basically the offset value from the box. Okay, so when I say 5 pixels. So from this particular bottom border, 5 pixels will be considered as the size for your shadow. Similarly, on the y-axis, you can specify the size in pixels. So you can notice over here that to the element we have specified box shadow as 5 pixel on values on offset x and y, and this is the blur radius of your shadow, and this is the shadow color. So blur radius is basically the depth of amount in which the shadow will be reflected. So it will have a blurry effect so that it looks like a shadow. So this is the output. So this is the your HTML box, and to which we have added this particular shadow. Okay. We also have text shadow. So in this case, the shadow will be applied to the text itself and not the box. So this is the similar syntax. So instead of box shadow, we are writing text shadow, and everything else remains the same. In this second example, what we have done is we have applied two shadows. So you can see in the first shadow, we have just one shadow with the red color. But here, if you notice closely, we have two shadow. One is in the red color and other one is the black color. Alright, so in the examples folder, you will find this folder that is gradients drop shadow. So in that folder, you will find these three files. One is the image file that we use, and then we have two files. One is CSS and the other one is HTML file. So I have opened these files in the Sublime, and the HTML page is also rendered over here. So in the HTML file, we have added few h1 and p tags, and we have also added classes to these HTML elements. So that is very straightforward code over here. So only this particular example where we have one div and then inside we have h1 tag and h2 tag. So this is something that we'll see later on. But now let us talk about the gradients and the shadows that we have created using this particular HTML code. So you can notice that in the head tag, I have referred the CSS file, and then that CSS file is here. So we have created all these classes, and inside these classes, we have the CSS property rules. So you can just go through these files and refer whatever the code that we have written. For this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to explain it from this particular window. I'm going to open the inspect window, and we'll just quickly check what is the CSS properties that are being applied to each of the component. So in the first CSS class, that is this LGTB, so this is nothing but linear gradients top to bottom. So we can see that we have specified height and width. So if I just enable, you can see that it is changing itself. So I'm just setting it back, and then you can see that the other background properties have got cancelled. So you can see that there is one strike through line that is being added on the CSS property. So the fallback CSS property rule that was there for the background color, that is getting overridden, and other whichever the background colors properties are not going to work on this particular browser, those are also overwritten. So you can notice here that this particular CSS property has got applied, and you can also see that the color is set here. So these are two color stops, so I can change from here, and you can see the gradients are also changing. Then we will see the next one. So this is almost the same, only thing is that it is starting from the left hand side. Okay, so if you want, I can change it to top, and it will turn into top to bottom gradient. If you want right to left, then I can write right, then it will shift from right to left. Let us check the third one. So when we are writing bottom left, so I can change it to, let's say, top left. You can see that it has got changed. I can write top right, so you can see that it is starting from the top right corner. Here in the next example, we have specified the degrees instead of the special keywords for the sides. So you can see that we can change this one, and you can see the change in the gradient that is happening on the screen. Okay, So you must be able to notice the difference that is happening. So it is now almost completely right to left, and gradually it will become bottom to top. Okay, so this is something that I was changing. So let me just reset it to 0 degrees. So you can see, even when I write 45, you can notice the difference over here. Then this is with the multiple color stops. So we have 3 color stops over here. So if you want, I can change it, and I can also add one more color to it. Let's say I'm adding 500. Okay, you can see that one more color stop has got added in the gradient. We can also set the locations of the color stops by using percentage. Okay, and you can also write in terms of pixels. So because the height is 100 pixels, I can write, let's say, 20 pixels. Okay, then I can write, let's say, here 50 pixels. Okay, like this. So this is how you can make these changes and set the size for each of the color stop. And in case there's a space available, so you can use the repeating linear gradient, and the gradient will repeat itself. So in case I change the width size for these values, so you can see that it is going to repeat more. Okay, so I'm just going to reduce this one as well. So you can see that the repetition is now increasing. Okay, so you can see this. Then we will talk about radial gradients. So in radial gradients, only this keyword is changing. Instead of linear, there's a radial now. So you can see the color stops are there. So it is rendering it properly. We can also specify the shapes over here, like ellipses. Instead of ellipse, you can write the circle. And in the next method, we have a radial gradient with its position and size set like this. So we can write farthest side at the left. So you can write, let's say, right and top. Okay, so this is how it is going to change its starting location. You can also write pixel information like this. Let's say 10 pixels. So like this. Okay, and you can also specify the other value. Let's say I'm going to write 20 pixels, something like this. Or you can try changing this values. You can see that the radiant circle is moving around. You can see that the radiant size is also changing accordingly. So let us continue. Here again we are using the repetitions. So we are just changing the value with repeating radial gradient, and it is going to repeat itself. We can change this width values, and it will work accordingly like this. Okay, it is going to repeat more. Then we will see this color gradient along with the transparency. For that, what we are going to use is, we are going to use rgba function, and there I'm going to set the alpha values. So you can see that when I change the alpha values like this, let's say I'm writing 0.05. Okay, you can see that there's a slight difference over there with let's say 0.5 and 0.9. Okay, but there are two things happening over here. We have added color stops, plus there is a background image also. So the colors are getting merged with the image also. The reason is the transparency that we are setting over here. So if I change this transparency to, let's say, 1 at both the variables, okay, so you will see that there is no gradient, or even the transparency is not there. Okay, so to achieve this, you can write something like this. Now we'll talk about the box shadows. So in terms of box shadows, you make use of property box shadow, and you can specify the x and y offset values. So you can see that when I'm increasing these values, the shadow width is also getting increased. Okay, and this is the radius of your shadow. So you can see that the transparency and everything is getting handled with this variable. So this will become a bit more blur when you increase the value, and when you go towards 0, you can see that the blur effect is getting reduced. Okay, at 0 almost there is no shadow. Okay, so when you increase, you can see that there's a quite good blur effect. And the final parameter is about the color. So you can change this color to any color that you want. Then we have the text shadow. So the text shadow gets applied to the text elements like this. As I shown one example in this slide, you can apply multiple shadows. So here I have added one red and black shadow. So you can notice over here. So let me just increase the offset value of this particular element, so you'll get a better idea. Yeah, so you can notice that there's this red color plus there is this green color. Let me try changing color of the second shadow. So let me just make it so very odd color, let's say blue or something. Yeah, so you can notice there is a blue color at the bottom, or I can also try reducing the radius of the shadow so it becomes more clear. Yeah, so there is this shadow, you can see that it's almost a text. Okay, so for the same HTML element you can create this multiple shadows like this. So what you can do is you can download these files and play around the code samples that we are given. So this is the sample code that is rendering this particular page.